Hello dear friends, it's very hearty and warm welcome once again. Dear friends, in this our today's lecture, we are going to study the new topic, that is human respiratory system. Friends, all of you are known in the body of human being to carry out different physiological processes. The different well-organized systems are existed, such as for the process of digestion there is a digestive system, for the process of reproduction there is a reproductive system, for the process of excretion there is excretory system, for the process of circulation of blood there is a circulatory system. In the same manner, for the process of respiration there is a respiratory system. The human respiratory system is broadly divided into two main parts, such as a respiratory tract and second, respiratory organs. Human respiratory system is broadly divided into two main components, such as the respiratory tract and respiratory organs. First of all, let us start the study of respiratory tract. Respiratory tract means it is the passageway for the pure air to flow from surrounding into the body, or say up to the lungs, and foul air to flow from lungs to the outside. So very simple. Respiratory tract is nothing but it is the passageway for the fresh air to flow from exterior to the body up to the lungs, and foul air to flow from lungs to the exterior. याचा अर्थ असा होतो की रेस्पिरेटरी ट्रॅक्ट म्हणजे हा पॅसेज वे आहे, हा मार्ग आहे की ज्याच्या मदतीने वातावरणामध्ये असलेली शुद्ध हवा ही फुफ्फुसांपर्यंत पोहोचवली जाते आणि फुफ्फुसांमध्ये शरीरामध्ये जमा झालेली जी अशुद्ध हवा आहे तिला परत बाहेर वातावरणामध्ये आणण्याचं काम केलं जातं. Now the human respiratory tract consists of different components, such as external nares, nasal cavity, internal nares, pharynx, larynx, trachea, bronchi and bronchioles. These all are the different components of respiratory tract. Now we have to discuss one by one each. Let us start. First, external nostrils may be known as external nares. External nostrils or external nares are nothing but simply a pair of small openings present at the lower end of nose. External nares, external nostrils are nothing but simply these are small pair of openings present at the lower end of nose for the entry of fresh air as well as exit of foul air. Now let me show here in diagram. Please look. Here I am going to show with the help of diagram the external nares. You know, here I have shown the nose, mouth, this is buccal cavity or oral cavity. I said just now, the external nares are nothing but simply a pair of openings present at the lower end of nose, and it facilitates the entry of fresh air into the body as well as exit of foul air to the exterior. Let me label here. These are the external nares. External nares lead into the nasal cavity. Second component of respiratory tract, that is nasal cavity. Name itself indicates. Nasal cavity means the cavity of nose. The nasal cavity is divided into two chambers, into two passages by means of one median and vertical septum made up of mesmoid cartilage. The nasal cavity, that is the cavity of nose, नाकाची जी पोकळी आहे तिचे दोन भाग पाडलेले असतात ड्यू टू प्रेझन्स ऑफ वन मेडियन अँड वर्टिकल सेप्टम. मध्यभागी एक उभा पडदा आहे ज्याला आपण नाकाचा पडदा असं म्हणतो. इट इज कार्टिलॅजिनस इन नेचर. It is made up of mesmoid cartilage just above the palate. You know palate, the roof of buccal cavity. Here is a buccal cavity, mouth cavity. ही तोंडाची पोकळी आहे आणि तोंडाच्या पोकळीचं हे जे रूफ आहे, छत आहे, त्याला आपण पॅलेट किंवा मराठीत टाळू असं म्हणतो. आणि या पॅलेटच्या वर nasal कॅव्हिटीचे दोन भाग पाडणारा जो मध्यभागी उभा पडदा असतो त्याला nasal septum असं म्हणतात. Because of which the nasal cavity is divided into two passages, into two chambers known as nasal passages. Nasal passages. Now, each nasal passage is tubular and it is further divided into three parts. प्रत्येक nasal passage चे तीन उपभाग पाडले जातात. Such as first one, vestibule. It is the lowermost and short part of nasal passage. Let me show here in the diagram. Vestibule, it is a short and lowermost or proximal part of nasal passage just above the external nares. External nares च्या लगेच वर असलेला आणि nasal passage चा सगळ्यात जो खालचा भाग आहे, short part आहे, त्याला म्हटलं जातं vestibule. Look at the diagram. Consider this much part represents vestibule. This vestibule is internally lined by skin and therefore it shows presence of hairs as well as sweat gland and sebaceous gland. अर्थात या ठिकाणी या वेस्टिब्यूल आतल्या बाजूने स्किन प्रेझेंट असते. वेस्टिब्यूलच्या आतल्या बाजूने स्किन प्रेझेंट असते आणि म्हणून या भागामध्ये there are presence of hair as well as sweat gland. You know sweat glands are responsible for the secretion of sweat, घर्म ग्रंथी, as well as sebaceous gland. Sebaceous gland, they secrete a waxy secretion, oily secretion, that is sebum. And this vestibule, due to presence of hairs, it acts as a sieve. It acts as the filter. It checks, it traps the entry of dust particles or large sized particles, large sized bacteria into the body. Second part, middle part, is known as respiratory region. We are talking about the different parts of nasal passage. I said that the lowermost part, proximal part, is known as vestibule. Now middle part is known as respiratory region. This respiratory region is also known as conditioner. It is middle part. It is internally lined by respiratory epithelium made up of ciliated columnar epithelial cells. It is internally lined by ciliated columnar epithelial cells. It is highly vascular and therefore internally it appears as a pinkish reddish in color as it is vestibular, as well as this part shows presence of few mucous glands and serous glands. Mucous cells and serous cells. Try to understand. Mucous cells, they secrete a sticky secretion, that is mucus, and serous cells secrete watery fluid. Now, as I said, that the respiratory region is internally lined by ciliated columnar epithelial cells. Therefore, first of all, it again acts as the sieve, it acts as the filter, and it checks the entry of different particles or large sized bacteria into the body, as well as it brings about the warming. It makes the air warm and the moist. Is that clear? So here I told you the function of respiratory region. Let me show in the diagram. Please look. Here is the respiratory region. This much. Just consider. या ठिकाणी मधला भाग दाखवलेला आहे रेस्पिरेटरी रिजन. आत्ताच जसं मी दोन वेळा म्हटलं की it is internally lined by ciliated epithelium, means there are presence of cilia which shows the beating and traps the entry of different particles into the body, which can enter into the body along with inhaled air. So this part is responsible to make inhaled air warm and moist. Third part is olfactory region. It is the distal part, uppermost part. Let me show somewhat here. This part represents the olfactory region. Olfactory region is internally lined by olfactory epithelium made up of sensory epithelial cells. Sensory epithelial cells means these cells are responsible to receive the stimulus of sense of smell. Sense of smell. Gandha jnana means this part, olfactory region of the nasal passages, is actually the organ of smell. It detects the odor of inhaled air. आतमध्ये येणाऱ्या हवेचा वास, गंध हा कोणत्या प्रकारचा आहे त्याची संवेदना स्वीकारण्याचे काम या ठिकाणी olfactory region करत असतो. Now the nasal passages open internally into the pharynx by means of pair of openings known as internal airs. Let me show. These are internal nares. So internal nares open into the next part of respiratory tract, that is pharynx. So let us talk about the pharynx. Third part, pharynx. Pharynx, it is vertical, short, tube-like structure. It appears slightly inverted pyramid-like structure. It appears slightly inverted pyramid-like structure because of its slightly conical nature. Now the pharynx actually serves as a common passage for respiratory system as well as digestive system. Pharynx हा जो भाग आहे हा रेस्पिरेटरी सिस्टीम म्हणजे श्वसन संस्था आणि डायजेस्टिव्ह सिस्टीम म्हणजे पचन संस्था यांचा सामायिक भाग मानला जातो. इट्स अ कॉमन पार्ट ऑफ रेस्पिरेटरी अँड डायजेस्टिव्ह सिस्टीम. नाउ दिस pharynx is further divisible into three parts. pharynx चे तीन भाग पाडले जातात, such as its uppermost part into which internal nares open known as nasopharynx. The middle part which receives buccal cavity, mouth cavity, is known as oropharynx, while the lowermost part is known as laryngopharynx. Why? I will tell you. So I said that the pharynx, it is a short vertical tube-like structure, slightly inverted pyramid-like, slightly conical in shape, and it is divisible into three parts: upper nasopharynx, middle oropharynx, and lower laryngopharynx. The laryngopharynx leads into two tubes. Laryngopharynx या ठिकाणी दोन नलिकांमध्ये उघडत असतं. Let me show the tube. The tube along the anterior side of body or front side is known as trachea or windpipe, and the tube which is present behind the trachea posteriorly is esophagus, that is food pipe, which is the part of digestive system. Okay, so I said that the laryngopharynx leads into two tubes known as trachea, which is present along the front side, and esophagus, which is present posteriorly or back side. Now this trachea is known as the windpipe. So let us talk about the trachea. आता आपण ट्रॅकियाचा विचार करणार आहे. Fourth, trachea. At the upper end of trachea, there is a presence of specialized structure, specialized organ known as larynx, which is oftenly known as Adam's apple. So first of all, let us talk about this larynx. Let me show separately. Consider, here is the trachea and here is a larynx. Larynx, it is a cartilaginous structure. It is made up of cartilage. The larynx has opening which leads into the laryngopharynx is known as glottis. Look at the diagram. Here also we can show. या ठिकाणी मी ट्रकिया दाखवलेली आहे आणि आता जसं मी म्हटलं की या ट्रकियाच्या वरच्या टोकाला लॅरिंग्स प्रेझेंट आहे आणि या लॅरिंग्सचं वरच्या बाजूला जे स्मॉल स्लिट आहे, ओपनिंग आहे, त्या ठिकाणी पण मी दाखवलंय. इट इज नोन ॲज द ग्लॉटिस विच ओपन्स इनटू द लॅरिंगोफॅरिंग्स. नाउ at the anterior margin of this larynx there is a presence of small flap. या laryngopharynxच्या anterior margin ला पुढच्या बाजूला एक छोटीशी muscular flap असते. There is a small muscular leaf like structure. It is known as epiglottis. This glottis, that is the opening of larynx, remain open except during swallowing. It means at the time of swallowing this glottis is closed by epiglottis at the time of swallowing only, otherwise it remain open. Now why this is so? Because we know that this part, pharynx, it's a common passage for respiratory system as well as digestive system. So during ingestion of food, after mastication, whenever the food is swallowed, that should be passed through this opening, that is gullet, into the esophagus, into the food pipe. ज्या वेळेला अन्नाचं चर्वण झाल्यानंतर अन्न गिळलं जातं त्यावेळेला ते अर्थातच या ठिकाणाहून या युसोफॅगसच्या ओपनिंग मधून, त्याला गलेट म्हणतात, युसोफॅगस मध्ये फूड पाईप मध्ये अन्न नलिकेमध्ये जायला हवं. बट as there is another opening of larynx, that is glottis, so there may be a chance of entry of any food particle into the trachea and it is fatal. It is fatal. So to prevent the entry of any food particle into the trachea during swallowing, this epiglottis closes the glottis. You know, during swallowing the larynx moves slightly up in this manner so that it comes in contact with epiglottis and glottis get closed. ज्यावेळेला आपण गिळलं जातं त्यावेळेला हे लॅरिंग्स हे थोडंसं वर सरकतं की ज्यामुळे एपिग्लॉटिस हे जे स्मॉल फ्लॅप लाईक लीफ लाईक कार्टिलॅजिनस स्ट्रक्चर आहे ते या ग्लॉटिसला एका क्षणाकरता बंद करत असतं आणि त्यामुळे अन्नाचा कुठलाही बारीकसा कण सुद्धा या ठिकाणी ट्रॅकियामध्ये जात नाही. You must know this larynx is more prominent in men than in women. पुरुषांमध्ये हा larynx हा जास्त prominent असतो, conspicuous असतो. Actually, before puberty, before sexual maturity, the larynx is less conspicuous, less prominent in both. That is, male as well as female. They are similar in males as well as female before attaining puberty, but after attaining puberty the larynx becomes more prominent in male. It is one of the secondary sexual character in male. Now this larynx, except respiratory organ, also acts as a voice box. Voice box, स्वरयंत्र. लॅरिंक्स हे स्वरयंत्राचं पण काम करतं, अर्थात इट हेल्प्स इन द प्रोडक्शन ऑफ साऊंड ड्युरिंग द एक्सहेलेशन ऑफ एअर. ज्या वेळेला फुफ्फुसातून हवा बाहेर फेकली जाते त्यावेळेला या कार्टिलेज मध्ये असणाऱ्या ज्या काही स्ट्रिंग्स असतात त्या व्हायब्रेट होतात अँड इट हेल्प्स टू प्रोड्यूस द साऊंड. नाउ कम टू द ट्रॅकिया. ट्रॅकिया windpipe, it is a narrow tube having the length of about 11 centimeter and 2.5 centimeter in width. सर्वसाधारण 11 सेंटीमीटर लांब आणि 2.5 सेंटीमीटर रुंद अशा प्रकारची ही नलिका आहे, श्वास नलिका. This trachea, look at the diagram. This trachea, it runs through the neck downward and at the middle of thorax. Listen carefully. Trachea, it runs down through the neck. ही ट्रॅकिया श्वासनलिका आपल्या गळ्यामधून खाली जाते and at the middle of thorax, सर्वसाधारण छातीच्या मध्यभागी it divides into two tubes. Let me show you the diagram. Known as primary bronchi or major bronchi. Bronchus singular, bronchi plural. Let me label. This is trachea and these two are primary or major bronchi. Singular, primary bronchus. These primary bronchi extend into the lungs. These primary bronchi enter into the lungs. Left primary bronchus enters into the left lung and right primary bronchus enters into the right lung. After entering into the lungs, या दोन्ही ब्रोंकाय त्यांच्या रिस्पेक्टिव्ह लंग्स मध्ये प्रवेश करतात आणि लंग्स मध्ये फुफ्फुसांमध्ये प्रवेश केल्यानंतर each primary bronchus further divides. The right primary bronchus divides into 3 small tubes while the left primary bronchus divides into 2 tubes. These are called as secondary bronchi or lobar bronchi. Right? Primary bronchus divides into 3 secondary bronchi and that secondary bronchi extend into the 3 lobes of right lung. थोड्या वेळानंतर मी बोलणार आहे. The right lung has 3 lobes. Let me show temporarily. consider here is a right lung and here is supposed to be the left lung. The right lung has 3 lobes, about which we shall discuss after a few minutes. And I said that each secondary bronchus extend into 3 lobes of right lung, and the left lung has 2 lobes. Therefore, these 2 secondary bronchi extend into the 2 lobes of left lung. Inside the lung, लंग्सच्या आतमध्ये, फुफ्फुसांच्या आतमध्ये, each secondary bronchus further divide into still smaller tubes known as tertiary bronchi, which in turn divide into still smaller tubes called bronchioles, and each bronchiole further divides into still smaller tubes called as alveolar ducts, Each alveolar duct opens into blind sac-like structure, hollow sac-like structure known as alveolar sac. About alveolar sac we shall study after some time. Now these trachea, primary bronchi, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi and bronchioles are internally lined by pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelial cells. Pseudostratified columnar epithelial cells, and these cells are ciliated. They show the presence of cilia. Small hairy structures, and that entire passage also shows the presence of mucous cells. You know, mucous cells, they secrete a sticky secretion, that is mucus. The mucous glands are only absent in the bronchioles because that mucus can block these very thin bronchioles. It can block the passage, it can block the airway. Okay, so the mucous glands are absent only in bronchioles, but entire this passage is internally lined by pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelial cells, and this airway into the lungs is togetherly known as bronchial tree. It means the bronchial tree, it includes the primary bronchus, secondary bronchi, tertiary bronchi, bronchioles and alveolar duct, because of which the external fresh air can reach into the lungs up to its smallest component, that is alveolar sac. In the same manner, the foul air is carried back from lungs to the exterior. This is all about the respiratory tract. Now we have to discuss about the second, that is respiratory organs. Let us talk. So now let us talk about the respiratory organs. We know that in human being, respiratory organs are lungs. First of all, location. We all are known, in human being there is a presence of pair of lungs, and they lie in the thoracic cavity on both the sides of heart. Heart is located at the middle, and on both the sides of heart there are presence of lungs. Thoracic cavity, we know it is a bony cage which is made up of ribs along the ventral and lateral side, sternum, that is breastbone, along the ventral side, and thoracic vertebrae along the back side, posterior side. Thoracic cavity. अर्थात छातीचा पिंजरा हा कशाने बनलेला आहे आपल्याला माहित आहे. छातीचा पिंजरा हा रिब्स अर्थात आपण मराठीत ज्याला बरगड्या असं म्हणतो, स्टर्नम म्हणजे ब्रिस्ट बोन छातीचा हाड आणि थोरॅसिक व्हर्टिब्री म्हणजे थोरॅक्स रिजन मध्ये असणाऱ्या पाठीचा मणके, या तिघांनी ही प्रोटेक्टिव्ह केज बोनी केज तयार झाली. या आपण म्हणतो थोरॅसिक केज, in which the lungs are present just on both the sides of heart. Now each lung is surrounded by two protective coverings. प्रत्येक लंग भोवती दोन प्रोटेक्टिव्ह मेम्ब्रेनस कव्हरिंग्स असतात. Let me show in the diagram. Please look. These two membranous protective coverings are known as pleura. The inner membrane, which is very close to the surface of lungs, is known as visceral pleuron, singular pleuron, while outer one is known as parietal pleuron. In between visceral and parietal pleuron there is a very little space known as pleural cavity or pleural space, and it is filled by means of a thin film of watery material, that is pleural fluid. Of course, it is protective in nature. It acts as the lubricant during the breathing when it occurs the collapsing and extension of lungs. ज्यावेळेला श्वासोच्छवास चालू असतो, ब्रीदिंग चालू असतं, त्यावेळेला लंग्स ज्यावेळेला अंकुचन आणि प्रसरण पावतात त्यावेळेला हे प्लुरल फ्लुइड लुब्रिकंट म्हणून काम करतं. इट इज प्रोटेक्टिव्ह इन नेचर. नाउ लेट अस टॉक अबाउट द लंग्स ऍक्च्युअली. आता प्रत्यक्ष आपण लंग्स बाबत विचार करणार आहेत. वन मोर थिंग, दिस प्लुरा ऑफ बोथ द लंग्स, दोन्ही लंग्स भोवती असणारे हे जे प्लुरा आहे, डबल मेम्ब्रानस कव्हरिंग्स आहेत, दे युनाइट मेडियली टू फॉर्म अ कॉमन मेडियन सेप्टम. दोन्ही लंग्स भोवती असणारे प्लुरा मध्यभागी एकमेकाला चिकटलेले असतात आणि त्या ठिकाणी इट फॉर्म्स अ कॉमन सेप्टम, एक पडद्यासारखं स्ट्रक्चर तयार होतं. बिकॉज ऑफ द फ्युजन ऑफ प्लुरा ऑफ बोथ द लंग्स इट इज नोन ॲज मेडियास्टिनम. In the lower region of mediastinum there is a space known as mediastinal space in which the heart is located. Try to understand. मी आता असं म्हटलं की दोन्ही लंग्स भोवती असणारे हे जे प्रोटेक्टिव्ह आवरण आहेत ज्यांना आपण प्लुरा असं म्हणतो, ते मध्यभागी एकमेकांच्या जवळ येऊन चिकटतात आणि त्यांच्यामुळे एक कॉमन सेप्टम पडद्यासारखं स्ट्रक्चर तयार होतं ज्याला म्हटलं जातं मेडियास्टिनम. आणि या मेडियास्टिनमच्या खाली जी पोकळी आहे तिला म्हटलं जातं मेडियास्टिनल स्पेस इनटू विच हार्ट इज लोकेटेड. या ठिकाणी हार्ट हे प्रेझेंट असतं. नाउ लेट अस टॉक अबाउट द एक्सटर्नल फीचर्स ऑफ लंग्स. The lungs are soft, spongy and elastic organs. Each lung weighs about 450 grams. I said that the lungs are soft, spongy and elastic organs. Each lung weighs about 450 grams. Though both lungs appear identical in size, but the left lung is slightly smaller than the right lung. The lungs externally appear smooth and pinkish and also shows many polyhedral areas. External surface वर बाह्य पृष्ठभागावर अशा प्रकारचे असंख्य हेक्सागोनल किंवा पॉलीहेड्रल बहुभुजाकृती मार्किंग्स दिसतात. Now, as I said, that lungs are pinkish in color in young age, but later on it becomes gray and black in old age due to the environmental pollutants which may enter into the lungs during inhalation. श्वासोच्छवास करत असताना जी हवा आत घेतली जाते तिच्या बरोबर येणारे जे पोल्युटंट्स आहेत, प्रदूषक आहेत, ते फुफ्फुसांमध्ये साचत गेल्यामुळे हळूहळू जसजसं वय वाढत जातं तसतसा कलर ऑफ लंग्स इट टर्न्स फ्रॉम पिंक टू ग्रे अँड ग्रे टू ब्लॅक. In case of smokers, those people who have addiction of cigarette smoking, their lungs appear more darker. Now about the shape. Look at the diagram. The lungs appear slightly conical in shape. Its upper and narrow end is known as apex, while the lower end is known as base. Along the lower end, near the base, the lungs are slightly concave. Slightly concave. Please look. खालच्या तळाकडे जो भाग आहे, जो ब्रॉड आहे, ज्याला बेस म्हटलं जातं, त्या ठिकाणी लंग्स थोड्याशा कॉन्केव्ह आहेत, अंतर्वक्र आहेत, टू अकॉमोडेट द ॲब्डॉमिनल डायफ्रॅम. You know abdominal diaphragm. It's a muscular diaphragm which divides our body cavity into upper thoracic cavity and lower abdominal cavity. जे mammals एक वैशिष्ट्य आहे. या ठिकाणी असणारा जो पडदा आहे तो या ठिकाणी अकॉमोडेट होण्यासाठी abdominal diaphragm ला अकॉमोडेट होण्यासाठी या लंग्सचा लोअर सरफेस थोडासा कॉन्केव्ह असतो. Because the abdominal diaphragm also play important role in the process of breathing. श्वासोच्छवास या क्रियेमध्ये तो ॲब्डॉमिनल डायफ्राम हा महत्त्वाची भूमिका बजावत असतो. सेकंड थिंग, द लेफ्ट लंग एक्सटर्नली शोज टू लोब्स बाय मीन्स ऑफ an oblique groove or fissure. Look at the diagram. या ठिकाणी या लेफ्ट लंगला अशा प्रकारे एक ग्रूव दिसते, फिशर खाच दिसते, because of which the left lung is divided into two lobes. Upper lobe is called left superior lobe and lower lobe is called left inferior lobe. While the right lung is divided into three lobes because of two grooves such as horizontal groove, transverse groove and oblique groove. Transverse fissure and oblique fissure which divides the right lung into three lobes such as right superior lobe, right middle lobe and right inferior lobe. Now I have already told you that internally each lung shows such type of bronchial tree and at the lowermost end of bronchial tree there is a presence of a small blind sac-like structure known as the alveolar sac. So let us talk about that alveolar sac. One more thing, the left lung along its anterior and median side shows a shallow notch. Please look at the diagram. या लेफ्ट लंगला anterior median side ला एक shallow groove आहे, shallow notch आहे, खोलगट भाग आहे. It is called cardiac notch. याला cardiac notch असं म्हणतात. Of course, it is necessary to accommodate the heart. We shall study about the heart in the same chapter later on, but you must know that the heart is present in the mediastinal space, but the apex of heart is slightly slanting towards the left side. हृदयाचा जो निमुळता भाग आहे तो डाव्या बाजूकडे झुकलेला असतो आणि त्याला प्रॉपर अकॉमोडेट होण्यासाठी along the anteromedian surface of left lung there is a presence of notch known as cardiac notch. Now come to the alveolar sac. In each lung, at the terminal end of alveolar duct, there is a presence of a blind sac. I have already told you, known as alveolar sac. Let me show you the diagram. Consider this is supposed to be the smallest branch of bronchial tree, that is alveolar duct, and it leads into the alveolar sac. Each alveolar sac consists of a median passage. With the help of dotted line I am going to show. प्रत्येक alveolar sacच्या मध्यभागी एक median passage आहे, and that median passage leads into many small sacs. Let me show. हा जो median passage आहे तो असंख्य लहान लहान sacs मध्ये उघडत असतो. Just consider these sacs are known as alveoli, singular alveolus, or may be known as air sacs. The number of alveoli, the number of air sacs is countless, but on an average there are presence of about 75 crores of alveoli in the lungs, and the total surface area of these alveoli is near about 100 square meter. लक्षात आलं? या ठिकाणी लंग्स मध्ये जवळपास 75 करोड अल्व्हेओलाई असू शकतात, जरी त्या काउंटलेस असल्या तरी अंदाजे, आणि त्यांचा एकूण पृष्ठफळ जवळपास 100 चौरस मीटर आहे. And this large surface area of alveoli facilitates the maximum exchange of gases between the air present in the alveoli and blood. The wall of alveolus is very thin and it is made up of simple squamous epithelium. Consider, here is supposed to be a single alveolus. Okay? Here I have shown many alveoli. These many alveoli togetherly gives the appearance of bunch of grapes to that alveolar sac. Now I said this alveolus has a very thin wall having the thickness of only 0.0001 mm, and it is internally lined. It is made up of simple squamous epithelium. You know, squamous epithelium is also called pavement epithelium. The cells of squamous epithelium are very thin and placed on basement membrane. Now the alveolus is closely associated with pulmonary capillaries. Let me explain. या ठिकाणी प्रत्येक alveolus वर, प्रत्येक air sac वर, प्रत्येक वायुकोशावर त्या ठिकाणी पल्मनरी कॅपिलरीजचं जाळं असतं. पल्मनरी कॅपिलरीज म्हणजे काय? रक्त केशिका. These pulmonary capillaries are of pulmonary artery. Listen. Pulmonary artery is the blood vessel which brings deoxygenated blood, अशुद्ध रक्त, from heart to the lungs. Mind well. याच्याबाबत डिटेल आपण पुढच्या टॉपिक मध्ये शिकणार आहोत. डोंट गेट कन्फ्युज्ड. काहींना असं वाटू शकतं की हे आर्टरी आणि हे अशुद्ध रक्त डिऑक्सिजनेटेड ब्लड कसं आणेल, बट इट इज द एक्सेप्शन. दिस पल्मोनरी आर्टरी brings deoxygenated impure अशुद्ध रक्त from heart to the lungs and it redivides to form such a thin capillaries, while these all capillaries reunite, join and form pulmonary vein. This pulmonary vein carries oxygenated blood from lungs to the heart. Why? Because at this level, at the alveolar level, it occurs the exchange of gases between the air and blood. या ठिकाणी या अल्व्हिओलस मध्ये वायुकोशामध्ये असलेली जी हवा आहे त्या हवेमधला ऑक्सिजन हा रक्तामध्ये डिफ्यूज होतो आणि रक्तामध्ये असलेला कार्बन डायऑक्साइड हा अल्व्हिओलस मध्ये डिफ्यूज होतो. या ठिकाणी गॅसेसची देवाणघेवाण होते. And for easy and efficient exchange of gases, the wall of this alveolus is very thin. Actually, it is known as the respiratory membrane. This respiratory membrane, let me tell you little bit detail. This respiratory membrane is made up of 4 components. Which 4 components? Look at the diagram. Suppose these are the squamous epithelial cells which form the lining of alveolus. I said just now these epithelial cells are based on supported by basement membrane. Now capillary, pulmonary capillary, consider here is the pulmonary capillary. The capillaries are also internally lined by squamous epithelial cells. So it is the squamous epithelium or endothelium of blood capillary, याला endothelium असं म्हणतात. आणि या एंडोथेलियल सेल्स परत त्याच्या बेसमेंट मेम्ब्रेन वर आहे. म्हणजे या ठिकाणी हे 4 पदरी अशा प्रकारचे एक मेम्ब्रेन तयार झालेले आहे. कशाने तयार झाले? द squamous epithelium which form the lining of alveolus, basement membrane of that lining of alveolus, then the endothelium of blood capillary and its own basement membrane through which it occurs the exchange of gases between the air and blood. In this manner, we have completed the entire details of human respiratory system. So let us stop here today. Bye and thank you.